Hey, it's Saturday. Uh, I thought I would go for a drive out to our local cafe. The neighbours are making heaps of noise around here today, so they're doing some DIY projects. So I thought I'd get out of the house for a little bit. There's a cafe just about 10 minutes away from us called Huia. So I'm going to go there and get a coffee, and I might go for a walk. And I thought we could talk about experimental film, the definitions of what it is and what it's not. So yeah, um, enjoy. I'm just had my coffee. It was beautiful, and I'm sitting out here looking at the harbour. It's just so stunning. There's a few kind of noises in the background, but I really like it here. It's lovely. Anyway, I've kind of written some notes down about what I wanted to explain. What experimental film is and what it's not. So the first thing to note, it's not bad film. Someone hasn't made a film and not put it together very well and then called it experimental because they didn't know what else to call it. It's not that. It has intention just like any other film. So, yeah. I think there's a reason why people say that is because there's often this element where a lot of people go, oh, I didn't get it. I didn't understand it. And I guess that there's an assumption that all film has to be narrative or have a character and a story, which is true of, commercial film generally and true of documentary as well, but not so much with experimental. The next, I had to move. Well, I didn't have to move, but I had some people come up and sit down and start chatting, and it's like I didn't really want to carry on filming. I'm still not really used to the type of filming where you're out and about in public and you're talking to a camera, but anyway, I'll get over it. Yeah, it's not about being a bad film, experimental film, I mean, it has intention. And the other thing, it's not industry. So when I say that, it's not usually made for, cinema or television production or any kind of real commercial use. It's usually more of an arts-based practice, so we'll get into that. Experimental film is part of a grouping of films, and they get lumped together, but they do have subtle differences. One of those is avant-garde film, another would be underground film. Then there's art film and video art, sorry. And some people call it installation, but that's not a medium, that's just a way of experiencing it. So we'll go through a couple of the differences between these types. Avant-garde is more political, and it definitely has connections with avant-garde film of the 1920s, 30s, and American avant-garde of the 40s, 50s, 60s, and so forth. And it's part of the modernist art movement that was happening at the time. There were a lot of modernist painters and writers and poets, especially in the 1920s and 30s, that were also involved in experimental avant-garde film. So it does have a slight difference, I think. It's not so engaged with the experimental as in not really experimenting with technology or concept. However, it actually can. There's real links here between both of those terms, experimental and avant-garde. It's actually quite hard to define the differences between them. Experimental, I guess, for me is when the artist is particularly looking at trying something new, either technically, morphing new and old technologies together, trying something new conceptually, or trying something new in the process and in narrative. So I guess with my film that I'm working on at the moment, the experimental part of it is the process, the pre-filming part, and also how I'm going to structure narrative, because a lot of my experimental work does have narrative in it. It's just formed in a very uncommercial way. So experimental has that kind of element that you are experimenting with something, where avant-garde doesn't have to have that. Video art and film art, in my mind, is usually more for an art gallery situation. Of course, experimental film and avant-garde film can be screened at a gallery. So there's all this mixture and all these definitions. They kind of morph and warp into each other. So it's really hard to kind of give them really clear definitions, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter, because if you say to someone, I'm engaged, or I'm making an experimental film, or I'm making an art film, or a video art, or an avant-garde film, there's a sense that it's not commercial. Usually these films are short, although there are experimental features, there's avant-garde features, so they can be long. However, if I probably would call it long form rather than a feature, because feature also gives the definition of a commercial, sellable film, where this may not be. It may be more arts practice. I just want to add in here too about underground film. So a lot of my friends actually are involved in underground film and underground film festivals. And for me, again, there's so many links, it's really hard to define the differences. However, underground to me is more about content, and not so much in the process of the making, although it can be experimental. So, yes, definitions. They're a funny thing. You can call your film anything you like. It really doesn't matter, as long as you're intentional about what you're doing. Experimental can be experimental for the maker. So even if the experiment of the technology or the concept has happened before, if it hasn't happened with that particular filmmaker before, it is still experimental. There's kind of this concept that you can't experiment because it's already been done before, but of course it hasn't been done by you or by me, so that experimental process is still completely valid to the artist. You'll always bring something new to it, and that newness is what makes it, I don't know, art, special, amazing, creative, what keeps me going. I think I'm going to leave it here. I really do think that it doesn't matter too much how you define it, if you call it avant-garde or experimental or art film or underground. It's up to you. And they all do have complete links into each other, but I think they do have subtle differences, which is good to know too. But I'm going to go for a walk along this beautiful beach and then head home. So thank you so much for, just hanging out with me for a little bit on this lovely Saturday afternoon, and I will catch you next time.